All right. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this second assessment workshop here in May. Of course, we had our first one and the first Tuesday of April just last month. So if you didn't get a chance to check that one out, feel free to let us know. We'd be happy to, of course, send you over the recording, or you'll be able to view it in the YouTube series that we're building, of course, as we continue this on. But my name, of course, is Nolan Duda. I'm the Client Experience Manager for Ideal Traits and have worked at Ideal Traits almost 6 years now. My anniversary is actually coming up on May 18th. So I've been working since May 18th, 2019. So very exciting stuff coming up down the pipeline. But of course, what we're going to be focusing on today for our second assessment workshop is going to be unlocking top performers. What we're going to be highlighting most specifically is going to be those sales personalities that you typically will see. So, of course, generally through the Ideal Traits assessment, the ones that we usually try to aim for or seek out the most are going to be those sales leaders, right? Generally, when we talk to our clients over the years, that's the most desirable personality that people are looking for when they're looking for their next best salesperson. But in addition to that, too, as well, there are a lot of great personalities that can come. So the four that we'll focus on and really talk about today will be your sales leaders, of course, your salesperson, your persistent, and your closer. Okay, so those are going to be the four that we go over, that we cover, and that we talk about. Now, whether you attended our last assessment workshop or not, through that, it was very well attended, as this one is here today too as well. And there was a lot of questions that were coming in from you all about specific situations or specific maybe things that you want to talk through that come with the assessment and maybe just in general. But today, of course, as we drill down on those four specific personalities, I would love for it to be the same, to where you bring questions. Last time, I think we had about 40, 45 questions come in throughout the 30 to 45 minutes that we were here. And that's what this session is meant for, right? It's meant for you to ask those questions, to bring about maybe some things that you've been unsure about, to help you be more confident when making your hiring decisions. Now, for this assessment workshop, as again, we're focusing on those four main sales personalities: sales leader, salesperson, closer, and persistent. I think it's important to indicate and talk about how bringing on good qualified salespeople within our organizations, no matter maybe what that organization is, can be the best and will be the best marketing that you can do and the best investment that you can make in your business for the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months, and certainly the next couple of years. So when you consider logging into your Ideal Traits account, really no matter what type of hiring situation that you're in, you could be fully staffed and feeling comfortable and moving in the right direction. You could be maybe one person short, but not in a rush to make that hire. Or you could be in a situation to where you are a couple people short and you need to hire very urgently, right? So again, those are pretty three specific boxes. I know that there can be a blend or a hybrid in between those two as well. But I would encourage you, no matter what situation that you're in, that you leave this session taking action on starting to begin that process of recruiting for more salespeople if you aren't already. And if you need, I guess, evidence to this, take a look at the staff ROI calculator that are present within the dashboard of your account. Again, once we leave this session, you should be able to see that in there, the ROI calculator that's there. And you can calculate out what it looks like to bring on just one more qualified salesperson to your office. So again, as we focus on top performing sales personalities, I wanted to start there because when you take that leap, no matter, again, what hiring situation you're in, to investing into that process, sponsoring your job ad, building automations, maybe subscribing to our virtual hiring assistant program if you don't have the time that's needed to invest into your process, that is the first step to making sure that you're able to use the information that you'll learn here today with the assessments and put them into action to then start looking and finding your next best salesperson that, again, can change your business for years to come. Okay, so again, we're going to cover a lot of good stuff over the next 30 to 45 minutes, but if you do have questions, I encourage you to use the question and answer. You can do that as soon as right now. If there's a question that you want me to get to, I'm going to share my screen here in a second, and that usually allows, or that has the chat go dark there for a second. So then I'll come back and we'll do that Q&A portion. But don't be shy. Don't wait till the end. Throw them in as they come up. Maybe you have some now. Maybe you'll get some as we get into it. But throw those questions in when I come off of sharing my screen. I'll go ahead and take a look at those specific questions and we'll be able to go through them. All right. But again, thank you again for being here. And this is going to be good information that you'll be able to take away and start implementing into your process. So let's proceed. Let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at a little bit of PowerPoint that I put together for us all. So you should be able to now see my screen to where you're seeing just one result for the sales leader. So as we go through this, I have 4 different types of personality results screenshot and put together here for us to take a look at. Again, you could go take a look at a sales leader or a closer or a persistent in your account today, and the numbers might look a little bit different, right? These are just people that are on our team today. Nathan, one of our great salespeople that we have at Ideal Traits. But first, of course, I think it's important for us to knock out a couple of different things before we get into the specific personalities. The first thing that we're going to want to cover is that task-oriented nature versus the relationship. What does that mean, right? Task-oriented people are generally more motivated by accomplishing those tasks, obviously, as the word, I suppose, describes itself. And that task-oriented nature could be described as something like accomplishing the close or maybe checking a box, right? It could be any of those different things. But when we think about any type of task that could be present within our offices, these task-oriented individuals are going to be more motivated to go that direction. Now, for your relationship-oriented people, they're simply more driven by building relationships and having those relationships with the people that they interact with, whether it's their clients, their colleagues, their peers, or whoever it may be. Commonly, I guess the cliche description here could be the person that's in an elevator that encourages and prompts that conversation that can happen, or that small talk that can happen by just 2 people that are supposed to have never met each other before. So your task-oriented traits are going to be your motivation and drive, and your throw and compliance. So we generally like to describe these as the outside, okay? So your outside numbers, so your 89 here and your 14, just to paint this specific example, are going to be your task-oriented numbers. Your relationship-oriented numbers, of course, are just going to be the inside, right? So that persuasiveness and convincing and that structure in routine. So when we take a look at these personalities, we'll talk about that verbiage a little bit in terms of the difference between task-oriented and relationship-oriented. An interview question that I love to ask in interviews that I conduct for the salespeople that we hire is, do you consider yourself to be more task-oriented or relationship-oriented? Most people say both, right? Because they see them both as very important, which I think that is true. But then I do ask them to be more specific and to select one. Again, a good interview question that maybe you can interact into your process. If you need some explanation on why it's beneficial, reach out to me after. I'm always happy to shed light on that. And interview questions is something that we can touch on too if someone has wants more insight there. But next, in terms of after the task-oriented and the relationship. So again, task-oriented is that outside, so your motivation and drive, your thorough and compliance. Your relationship-oriented is going to be your inside, so your persuasiveness and convincing, and your structure and routine. Now, typically when we're breaking these down, like, okay, motivation and drive, persuasiveness and convincing, structure, routine, thorough compliance, this can be self-explanatory to some dimension, but you might be wondering, okay, like, what does that mean? So I want to break down the 4 segments, the 4 segments that are present here. So your motivation and drive is exactly what it sounds like, right? Again, some of them are going to be self-explanatory. So it is that individual's motivation, right? Their drive to be able to accomplish the things that they like, the goals and the ambitions, their ability to make decisions, whether that's quickly or whether it needs to be a lot of thought that needs to go into it, right? So their drive to make things happen. If we relate it specifically to a sales scenario, we're going to see these people making a lot of cold calls. They're going to be very driven to be able to make those calls, to have those conversations, because that drive gets them to do what's needed to do in order for them to hit their daily expectation that you have for them, their sales goals for the day, their sales goals for the week, or for the month, right? They have that drive. They're very competitive, and they want to make sure that they stay on the top of what they need to do, because they never want you to have to come to them and tell them that they're not doing enough, right? So they have that drive. They have that ambition. Next is going to be your persuasiveness and convincing, okay? This is going to be that individual's influence, okay? So when we think about influence, what does that mean? Typically, it's someone's ability to build relationships, right? So if they're able to have conversations with people and have those conversations flow easily without a lot of awkwardness that's present, right? Of course, sometimes this isn't necessarily dependent on one person if the conversation has to happen between 2 people, right? But again, how are they able to influence? Are they able to convince people? Are they able to tap into that persuasive side of themselves to be able to carry the conversation to where it needs to go? Again, another key construct of typically a sales position, because Of course, in a sales role, like you need to build trust, you need to build relationships, you need to build rapport, you need to do all these different things that lead to you accomplishing the task or getting the sale, if you will. So again, first two are pretty self-explanatory. Now, structure and routine. This can mean a lot of different things. But when we talk about structure and routine, we're going to talk about the environment that is present within. As you can see with Nathan's score here, his structure and routine score is an 11. So a lot of people might look at this and be like, I don't think that's a good thing, right? But typically for our salespeople, we want their environment to welcome a little bit of, to be spontaneous. Okay, so we want them to be fluid. We want them to be flexible. We want them to be spontaneous. We want them to be able to roll with the punches, right? So when we talk about structure and routine, we're talking about the environment. And as we can see here, Nathan, he prefers a little bit more of an environment that welcomes new things, right? And isn't a set schedule. So every day from 9 to 10, he's doing this. And then from 10 to 11, he's doing this. And from 12 to 1, he's doing this, right? His schedule has some variance, and he has the ability to be flexible with that and actually prefers it, as we can see here with this score. But again, not talking specifically about Nathan, talking more specific to structure and routine, this is going to be relevant to the environment that people want to see. And Nathan, of course, with his low score, is looking for an environment that doesn't necessarily possess a lot of structure or routine, right? It has a lot of variance. And then the last one is your thorough and compliance, and this is going to be your process. Okay, so if you have a set process that you have for your customer service representatives to do something within your agency, you're oftentimes witnessing your salespeople being a little bit more loose with this process, right? Sometimes they find those loopholes, can commonly be described as, do first, ask for forgiveness later, right? So again, not a bad thing if you're looking for a salesperson, right? Because we want them to be creative when they're solving their problems. We don't want them to do anything that puts our agency in jeopardy, right? But they're going to do things, they're going to creatively think, they're going to want an environment or processes that can, generally speaking, they can go a little bit outside of the box to be able to make things happen. Okay. So again, important there to break down sort of your task oriented and versus your relationship. But then in addition to that too, as well, break down sort of those 4 segments within the motivation and drive: persuasive, convincing, structure, routine, and thorough and compliance. When we talk about sales personalities, we're going to be focusing a lot on your motivation and drive and your persuasiveness and convincing. But you're going to see as we, not all salespeople are the same. So you're going to see certainly a big difference between your sales leader and, let's say, your persistence. Again, as we've discovered in Success Spotlights or our last assessment workshop, my personal favorite personality is the persistent. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I always have to make sure that I mention that. So nonetheless, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you get that. And of course, if there's questions on that are popping in, I'll get to them here in a second. But let's talk specifically about the sales leader. So again, the 4 that we're going to cover is your sales leader, your salesperson, your closer, and your persistent. Those are the 4 that I have examples set out for you. We're going to go through what one sales leader result can look like. And we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of their strengths and where, of course, they're going to provide benefits to your teams. Now, also important to note, what you're looking for in a salesperson is different than what I'm looking for in a salesperson, because our roles and responsibilities might look a little bit different. So share some insight to that in the question and answer too as well. And I can help you sort of paint the picture in terms of what might be best applicable or best suited for you. But again, specifically for your sales leader. So we see these individuals. I'm going to have 4 strengths and 4 benefits to the team. And then we can break down these scores a little bit too. I know I've already broken down Nathan's a little bit, so some of that might be repetitive, but we'll go through this and make sure that it's pretty seamless for you. Okay. So strengths: highly driven, independent, adaptable, and optimistic. Okay. So we see this within that motivation and drive and persuasive and convincing. Very optimistic people, right? Very driven to make things happen, very optimistic that they will happen because they're putting in the work, right? And they have the drive to be able to really control their own destiny and do what's needed in order to get the end result. We see the adaptableness of them within the structure and routine, right? Again, as I mentioned with Nathan, we want an environment that's a little bit more spontaneous for Nathan to be able to thrive in, right? We don't want restrictions. We don't want our salespeople to feel as if they're being squeezed or put into a box, right? We want them to be able to flourish and to be able to, spread their wings and fly, if you will. Again, another cliche example, but hopefully it paints a good picture for you. And then, of course, again, that optimistic nature and that independence comes from that motivation and drive as well, right? So very independent people, quick to make decisions, driven to make things happen, result oriented, very confident. And of course, they have that persuasive and convincing to be able to back it up. They're able to have the conversations with people to be able to move the needle, right? So having those relationships and being able to make that happen. Sales leader, a lot of you most likely when you're having completed assessment results, this is the one you're looking for. This is your diamond in the rough, right? We wish there was more sales leaders, but I encourage you to consider the other three that we're going to go over because they also can be great assets to your team too as well when you're looking for a sales position. Okay, so let's talk about the salesperson. A little bit different than your sales leader. So I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth here now that we've gone over the sales leader to compare it to the salesperson. A little bit difference here. We see with the motivation and drive, it dropped a little bit. It went down to 61. Should we be concerned about that, or is that something that is good, right? It depends what you're looking for, right? So the difference between this salesperson result and this is sort of one that I just went through and filled out. As you can see, my name is present there, but you'll look at my actual result here in just a second. But as you can see, the result for the motivation and drive, it drops a little bit. But then we see our structure and routine and our thorough and compliance rises a little bit. So what's the difference between a sales leader and a salesperson? So for this particular example, this salesperson is going to be a very relationship-oriented individual. We see their most dominant trait being the persuasive and convincing, right? So we see that here. Most dominant trait is the highest of the four. That's going to be the persuasive and convincing. What they're going to lean on when push comes to shove, right? Or when they're under pressure, as we can see here, is going to be their ability to build relationships. Now, a couple of strengths that I have knocked down here for us to focus on is one, they're client focused, okay? And again, that derives from their most dominant trait being persuasive and convincing, right? Their ability to influence. So they're going to be very client focused. This can come with a weakness, which I'll cover here in just a second. But again, if you're looking for someone who can build relationships, expand networks, do things like that, a salesperson can be a really good fit to that because they are so good at making sure that they build that trust, build that rapport, build that foundation, and build the network that's needed to be potentially very successful in the role that you have, okay? They're very enthusiastic and they're very animated, right? So when they're going through conversations, you can imagine it as somebody who's always bouncing around, using their hands, similar to what I do when they're going about their conversations. So again, very enthusiastic, very animated. And the way that I like to, I guess, categorize this is passion, right? So very passionate. So if you're looking for someone to bring that passion to your agency, this could potentially be a really good fit for you. They love a good challenge, right? So they also want to have to be challenged. Their second most dominant trait still is that motivation and drive. So you can see that there is going to be a lot similar to the sales leader, but subtle differences. Again, with that salesperson, what we're looking at here, they still love that challenge. So that drive, that determination, that independence that they have is still present. And then they use small details to work to their advantage. So not only are they able to influence, but that key part of that persuasive and convincing is they're also really good listeners, okay? Because again, they're focused on that relationship. So they can be very empathetic. They can be very focused on the conversation that is in front of them. So making sure, again, this is a really good fit for someone if you're looking for someone to really come out of the gates building a lot of relationships. But make sure you go about the proper steps that are a part of the process because not all salespersons are created the same. Now, when we consider the benefits to the team, they're incredibly influential, right? Again, most dominant trait is their ability to influence. So that makes perfect sense. They're great at networking. We've talked a lot about this already. If you're looking for someone to make an impact in a network or maybe grow one, if you're feeling as if you're lacking a little bit in the community, this can be someone that can really help you out in that aspect. Motivates through positivity, right? So we talked about, optimism with our sales leader, but then we talk about positivity with our salespeople. Kind of the same thing there. But again, they have that just very warm feeling is I guess one way I could describe it, right? So when someone has their most dominant trait as the persuasive and convincing, it's that very warm feeling. Another way that I can relate this to you all is going to be that nurturer. So if you've ever interviewed or had experience, maybe you have one in your office, a nurturer, they have that very warm feeling. The difference between a nurturer and a salesperson is the second most dominant trait for a nurturer is going to be either your structure and routine or your thorough and compliance, not your motivation and drive. Okay, so that's why typically, I guess your salesperson is the nurturer of the sales category, right? And then I guess the salesperson would be the nurturer would be customer service personality of the salesperson. Okay. So sort of works vice versa there. But again, that warm feeling, that ability to build relationships. And then they love teamwork, obviously, right? We've talked a lot about how they want to be involved and be engaged with people, and influence is their number one strength. Same thing holds true in the work that they do. They enjoy independence, but they don't want to be isolated. There is a difference there. Again, they enjoy independence, but they do not want to be isolated. So making sure that we provide them with a position that allows them to communicate with people regularly, whether it's the people and the staff within our office today, or it could be with our clients, and interacting with them on a regular basis too as well. Okay, so let's get more into our task-oriented personalities. Okay, so again, what we're going to focus on here is going to be the closer and the persistent as our next two. This is Rayon, another great member of our sales team. She is a closer. So these individuals, this is what we're going to work at here. I'm going to cover the strengths first, and then we can kind of get into it. So for your closer, they are good under pressure, right? So calm, cool, collected, right? They enjoy the pressure. They enjoy the challenge. And so the next thing here that I have written is that they want to be challenged, right? So we can't just give them mundane, routine tasks, right? We have to be able to fuel their ambition and fuel their need to feel challenged. And that really, I guess, gauges their competitive spirit. Okay. Now, next is they have strong communication skills, right? So this individual is usually very clear, concise, and their communication is never lacking. They give you the detail, but the thing to pay attention to here is that with the closer, sometimes it can be a little bit too blunt. Okay. And that is because, again, typically we see that their motivation and drive and that structure and routine sort of guides them, right? So they enjoy being very motivated, very independent, and they also want to have that set routine that's pretty structured. But again, not all closers will look the same. So if you have some closers in your account now, you might see some differences there. And then the last thing here is their ability to bounce back. So very resilient personality, right? Again, they love that independence. They love that challenge, and they're not afraid to welcome that second challenge. So making sure that we keep them entertained, I suppose, is a good way for me to describe the closer, making sure that we're throwing challenges at them, we're throwing new things. And when they're giving us ideas or they're giving us feedback, that we're not just shutting out their feedback without giving them any sort of context or any sort of insight, right? Because again, very independent personality that enjoys to be challenged, work independently, and go about that process. So we need to make sure that we're giving them information, and when we're communicating with them in the way that they want to be communicated with, very direct, cut out the fluff, right, and give it to them straight. That's typically how you're going to want to do it there. And then in terms of the benefits to the team, so they're incredibly innovative and productive, right? So they're going to bring those new ideas. They're thought-provoking, and they're also going to be very productive in their work, right? So their expectation is that they're going to work as hard as they need to in order to accomplish the task as fast as possible. Again, you see this with the most dominant trait being the motivation and drive, right? So that task-oriented side of them comes out when push comes to shove. They're going to do whatever it takes to accomplish the task, right? They can get hyper-focused on it. So the things to consider is to have them open up a little bit, to be like, hey, don't forget, you need to build the relationship in order to accomplish the task, right? That's a good reminder for the closer and the persistent, to be honest. Remind them again, you need to build that relationship in order to accomplish the task, right? So a good thing to put it into your back pocket if you have any closers or persistence in your office that sometimes can get too hyper-focused on the close. This can typically happen maybe if they're going through a little bit of a sales slump, or if it's getting to the end of the month and they need to, make some things happen to get to their goal or to your expectation that you have for them. But they're very quick to take action. Again, comes from their motivation and drive being their most dominant score. And then they challenge and motivate others, right? So they are fueled by competition. So they're going to want to make sure that same thing that they have inside themselves that they want to challenge, they also, in a competitive spirit, see other results and other people on the team as a potential challenger, to where they like to compete and motivate and go about that process. So monitor that closely too as well, because if it ever gets into that nature of being toxic, then it's going to become a problem for you. But as long as it stays in that good competitive spirit, then you should be all good there. But again, more of your task-oriented individual. So this is going to be a big difference when you go from salesperson to closer. They communicate differently. We have another closer on our team, Reg, actually, who we had her one-on-one just a week or two ago. And she's just like, nope, I just want to do my thing. Just let me do my thing and we'll be all good, right? So again, very, very independent people. And they want to be, obviously, sometimes left to their devices to be able to do what or what they know is expected of them, right? So Clear, good, awesome. Now, let's get on to my favorite. So this is my personality score. So you all can take a look at that and wonder and be like, wow, what a psycho. But persistent, all joking aside, is a very good sales personality. But what oftentimes, if I'm going to look inward, is you're going to see that sometimes they are going to struggle when it comes to building relationships. If you are looking for someone to, let's say, attend a community event by themselves and really, really, really like knock it out of the park by building a bunch of relationships and going up to people unprompted and having conversations, they may need some understanding on why that is the case, because this is a very, very, very task-oriented personality, right? But can be very good in sales, again, if you remind them that building those relationships and having those conversations is an important first step to accomplishing the task that's in place, right? So oftentimes, if you tell this person, hey, you need to make 100 calls a day and have 3 hours of talk time, they're going to do it every single day without compromise, right? And they're oftentimes going to keep themselves at a high standard and have that pretty high expectation. Okay. So as you can see, motivation and drive is going to be the most dominant trait. And typically for your persistence, the second most dominant trait is going to be that thorough and compliance, right? If we think back to what I mentioned at the beginning, that's going to be your process. Okay. So their ability to, they enjoy building processes a little bit, right? It still isn't necessarily a strength, more of I guess, in the middle range there as an area of opportunity. But again, they enjoy process. They enjoy the guidelines and they want to follow those guidelines. But usually it's pretty middle of the road here. So I guess, again, if I were to look inward in the way that I could describe it for myself, I guess as an example, what I would say is that if it's set up as an event that's supposed to be spontaneous and we're supposed to bounce around and there really isn't supposed to be an agenda, great. If it's an event that's supposed to have an agenda and have a set schedule, then that's the way that it should be. So it needs to be clearly defined, right? If it's supposed to be spontaneous, just let the persistent know, and they most likely will be okay with it as long as you clearly communicate. If it's more of a situation to where there's a set agenda and you're not following that agenda or you're going out of it, that could potentially cause a little bit of anxiousness for that persistent, right? Because they still do have that thorough and compliant side of them that enjoys following the process or following the plan. But they do enjoy an unstructured environment, right? So you can have them roll with the punches and be okay with change and flexible to it to a certain extent, right? But again, not necessarily the best personality if you're looking to have someone build a bunch of relationships and grow a network. They can do this eventually, right? But if you're looking for someone to do this like from the jump and be incredibly good at without little to no guidance, your sales leader, your salesperson are probably going to be better personalities for that. But I mean, someone like myself has been very good at attending trade shows and doing webinars like this with you all, whether it's assessment workshop or success spotlight and interacting with people. Typically, generally, when I relate back to why that's possible, it's because I see this as an opportunity for us to provide more education, which will help you all use ideal traits better, which is the task at hand. Okay. So again, really good stuff here. You can't necessarily go wrong with any of these four personalities. Again, your sales leader, your salesperson, your closer, and your persistent. Now, something I believe I missed when I was talking about the salesperson is what to look out for here. And on the opposite end of the closer and as the persistent, I mentioned that you're going to have to remind these two personalities sometimes to make sure that they don't lose sight of the relationship. For your salesperson, you have to be careful here because they might lose sight of the task. Okay. So again, sort of the opposite side of your closer and your persistent, the salesperson is overly concerned with the relationship. As I mentioned before, they're very client focused, which is great, right? So again, reminding them from time to time to make sure that they don't just build relationships without getting to the end of why those relationships are important. It could be that they do a really good job of talking to the clients or the prospects that you have for maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes, but then nothing comes out of that. So it's important for you to ask questions of, okay, what's happening? Where's the follow-up at? When are we going to be able to expect for that business to start rolling in, right? So again, opposite side of your closers and persistence. For your salesperson, keep a close eye on making sure that they don't lose sight of accomplishing the task and don't hyper focus on building relationships that really don't return anything for you. Okay. So I have a little bit of a diagram that's built out here. So motivation and drive, persuasive and convincing, structure and routine, and then thorough and compliance. So Jeff Safaya actually, as a presentation that he did with Jeremy Olson at RPOA, put this little presentation together. So I stole a couple of slides from it for us to talk about here. So of course, what we're focusing on, because generally when we consider salespeople, we consider these top two, right? Your lion and your peacock. So your motivation and drive and your persuasive and convincing. You will not find a salesperson that has their most dominant trait being thorough and compliance or structure and routine. It won't happen. They most likely are not necessarily in a purebred sales role where they're doing a lot of outbound calling or networking or building relationships, right? What we're looking for out of a successful salesperson, a high performer, is going to be either their most dominant trait to be motivation and drive and persuasive and convincing. Okay, so here's how we sort of describe this in terms of their communication style, right? So sales leader, the lion, right? The folks that have that most dominant trait being their motivation and drive, they work very quickly, right? They don't want much delays. They want things to happen as soon as possible, right? Your peacock, like your salesperson, like we went through, is your do it together, right? Your team-oriented person feeding off of relationships. And then your owl and your golden retriever are going to be do it in a caring way and do it right. But again, we'll focus on those two, the owl and the golden retriever, next week when we talk about account managers or customer service oriented personalities. Okay, so definitely going to look at your lions and your peacocks here. So best personality results, right? So you have your salesperson, so you have your sales leader, your salesperson, your closer, and your persistent, right? And then sometimes you have your competitor who has a motivation and drive of over 60. Okay, so typically what we're looking at here in terms of your personality results for the positions is going to be your insurance producer, your LSP, agency producer, account manager, outside sales, inside sales. So a lot of those things could look like the same thing. Okay, so a lot of outbound calling. As I mentioned before, if you're expecting this person to do like 100 cold calls, that's a lot of calling, right? So they're going to be creating relationships from a cold start as a part of that too as well. And then of course, we want the position to be 75 to 90% focused on closing business. Okay, so when they show up each day, 8 hours of the day, we want 75 to 90% of that time to be spent on closing business. The 10 to 25% should be confirm expectation up front, right? So the admin work that's needed, the servicing accounts to a certain extent, right? But again, we want a majority of their time to be spent on closing business, right? That's what our salespeople are. That's what we want our lions and our peacocks to be doing. We want our lions to not lose sight of building the relationships, and we want our peacocks to not lose sight of course, accomplishing the task, right? So a couple of things that separate those two, I guess, personalities that make it a little bit easier to understand. But then, of course, they're going to be, we want to make sure that we're closely monitoring their ability to meet sales goals, okay? So again, sales leader, salesperson, closer, persistent, and sometimes that competitor of over 60 when it comes to the motivation and drive, okay? So again, this is what we're going to want to be focusing on when we go through this. So if anybody has any questions on this or wants this slide deck or wants to take a closer look, feel free to let me know. I'm always happy to, of course, go through that. But at this point, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. It looks like we do have some questions to get to. Looks like Kai had, how did you know they don't want to be isolated? Is it by reading the structure and routine scores, right? Okay, yeah, good. So when it comes to that, yes, typically it's going to come to the structure and routine. But they'll let you know too as well, right? Like if they feel as that they don't have enough team-oriented nature as a part of it, we still want to make sure that the individuals that are a part of that team still feel connected to that respective team too as well. So yeah, let me read the question one more time though to make sure I'm answering it. How did you know they don't want to be isolated? Is it by reading the structured routine score? So yes, I would say yes to that, right? So the persuasive and convincing can also give you some insight into this as well, Kai, because if they have a high persuasive and convincing score, then this tells us that they enjoy that relationship building. They enjoy that that extroverted side of themselves, right? So again, this could be specific to the respective individual. So having that conversation with them and asking them could be a really good, important part to just having that healthy communication. But then also when you look at an assessment result, The 3-paragraph summary will also give you some good insight into their typical communication style too as well. Okay. Can you expand on your comment on the task drive for the closer? Yes. So closers are very independent people, right? So they are very task oriented and they are results oriented. This comes from their most dominant trait, always being the motivation and drive, without exception. So at this point, it's important to make sure you feed them achievable numbers that they're able to accomplish and help them get to those goals as much as possible. So again, Kai, hopefully that gives you some good insight into the closer, but very task-oriented individuals. They are, again, very independent, can be a little bit too blunt at times. So if you've ever had a conversation with a closer, sometimes it can be a little bit straight to the point, especially if they feel as if their time is being wasted. Whitney, shout out, says, love Reg. She's great. Very good. Yes, Reg is one of our best. So thank you for that, Whitney. She's awesome. Is a persistent person a good salesperson to drive leads to, or should I be looking for a closer? Again, can't go wrong with either, in my opinion. They're both good sales personalities. At Ideal Traits, I guess most specifically, we have had great persistence. We've had great closers. We've really had great of all personalities. And then we've had some people that didn't end up working out, right? So at that point, I think it's important for you to potentially drive leads to both and then track that data to see who's creating the best return on investment for you and then adapt your strategy as such. But I wouldn't necessarily, when it comes to these 4 sales personalities, I wouldn't say, hey, only drive leads to the salesperson, only drive leads to the persistent. All 4 are capable of hitting sales numbers and making it happen within your office. But when it comes to building that relationship and really maximizing it, you might see the best results come from maybe more of those relationship-oriented folks like the salesperson. But can't go wrong with either the persistent or the closer. I don't want to make the impression that one is better than the other. They're all great. They all can be really good for your office. So just make sure you send it to both, I would say, and then track that data as such. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Can you clarify the main difference between the sales leader versus the salesperson? So the sales leader, most predominantly, their most dominant traits are going to be the motivation and drive, but you're going to see really high scores in the motivation and drive and persuasive and convincing, whereas in the salesperson, their most dominant trait very clearly is going to be that that persuasive and convincing. So if you put the sales leader and the salesperson side by side, typically the sales leader is going to be the lion that I showed, and the salesperson is going to be the peacock, right? So the conversations, the bubbly personality, the warmth, and the people that are hyper focused on the relationship are going to be the salesperson. That lion, right? So sort of the best of both worlds, very extroverted, but are super driven people and super motivated, and really need to make sure that you keep them entertained with a lot of good tasks and a lot of result oriented nature is going to be on your sales leader side. So again, hopefully that makes sense. But again, I guess the easiest way to describe it is going to be your lion versus your peacock, bubbly personality versus more of a hyper-focused individual on accomplishing tasks, but is also very extroverted too as well. But both are great. Nolan, would you send me the slide deck? Yes. John, my email is just nolan@idealtraits.com. Shoot me an email. I'll send you the slide deck after that you can take a look at. How much do you trust the results? How accurate can they be? Good question. So the Ideal Traits Assessment's actually been used by over 18,000 agencies and has been university tested twice. So if we solely focus on the university testing and take all the business out of it for right now, when those universities tested the Ideal Traits Assessment, it came back with a validity score of 92.6%. So it is an incredibly accurate assessment. When I think of myself and my result, I am a persistent to a T, right? And I'm sure a lot of you could share your insight too as well. When you've taken the assessment for yourself, the result came back and it was you to a T, right? So incredibly accurate, in my opinion, of course, right? But folks have been using Ideal Traits for almost over a decade now and will not waver away from the results. So it's important to trust it, but it's also important to know what you're looking at, which is why we do these sessions and why we encourage you to reach out to us. So then, of course, we can give you some additional training beyond just this 30 to 45 minutes that we spend here. So, Guillermo, if there's anything else that we can help you with, please reach out to us. But, the assessment is accurate. And I guess I said this last time, but it's important to note too as well to not fully make your hiring decision only based off of the assessment, right? This is a piece to the puzzle. You should be using this in conjunction with a lot of different things, including your interviewing process, their resume, your overall gut feeling, all these different things. But the assessment should give you more of a more logic to a very emotional process, right? So a logical perspective to, again, a very emotional process. So I have a closer that has a 72, 75, 57 for motivation and drive. They scored high on the persuasiveness and structure and routine is high. How would they fall into being a closer? I would actually, I mean, that's differences in those scores there, Kai. I would recommend that they retake the assessment. And when they do so, I would say, when they're retaking it, let them know to just relax and not put too much pressure on themselves, because it seems as if they're painting themselves as potentially a very motivated individual when push comes to shove, but even in their own perception, it seems as if they're not. So again, I would recommend a potential retake there. But Kai, if you want to get with me after and we can go over that assessment result together just to make sure, because when considering a retake, it's important for me to look at all of the different segments of it to see if there's some potential for a little bit of anxiousness when completing the assessment. But it seems as if there is some anxiousness that's present and some uncertainty with those variants and those scores, as you had mentioned. I'd love to have a copy of the slide deck if possible. Thanks, Whitney. I do see your email here. Okay, so Drew Sill. Okay, I got it. I'll remember that, Whitney. So but if you do want to send me an email, so I guess absolutely certain I don't forget, that would be great. But I do see your email here, Whitney at johnsillagency.com. Tell Drew I said hello too when you get a chance. Britt, where does a networker fit in with these four? Are they generally more of a CSR? Could they work in a phone sales role? So networker is sort of your hybrid between the two. Very, very relationship oriented people. I believe that it's important when you have a networker in your sorry, I'm seeing the next question here. But when you have a networker in your organization, that you keep them very close to the expectations that you have, right? And you make sure that you clearly communicate, because a lot of times a networker can be perceived as someone that's good at everything, right? Because they'll tell you they're good at everything because they're very personable, they're very confident. Generally speaking, if it's a heavily outbound role, Britt, I would not necessarily recommend a networker, but I'm sure that there's agents even on here that have successful networkers in a very heavy outbound role. But generally speaking, I would not recommend a networker for a heavily outbound role. I would look for more of the something of the four that we've covered here today. They can be good in a CSR role, and they could be very good at cross-selling and upselling. So that is something to consider. But again, reach out to us. We'll take a look at the specific networker results to give you some recommendations. And then we can even talk to you a little bit more about the role that you're offering. So then we can understand a little bit more about what might be the best fit for it. Kevin Milner asked, do you think persistent is the best personality? Yes, I do. And for anyone that is wondering why, it is because I'm a persistent. So there is some bias that is a part of that. Kevin, of course, playing in on that. Thanks for attending, Kevin. Hopefully you've learned some things, and I'm sure you could have brought some good perspective here for this too. So hopefully we'll have Kevin maybe have some availability to be a guest in the future. And then George is our last question here. I've hired 2 closers and a persistent in the last 3 months. All of them are true to your points. Yes. So George, again, this speaks to the validity of the assessment. It's funny with closers and persistence, they like to feel supported, but they also like to be left to their own devices and be independent. And again, their communication style can be rather blunt, and their facial expressions can be rather, I guess, blunt in that sense too as well. But again, can be really great producers, and they can build really great relationships with your clients and your prospects, because generally speaking, when a closer or a persistent says they're going to do something, it gets done because they're very sure in that sense. So perfect. All right. Well, I appreciate you all for hopping on here. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So as we wrap up here, if you do have a question, please feel free to throw it in there, and I'll make sure that we get to it before we wrap up. But again, a couple of key points that we mentioned here. Not all sales leaders, not all salespersons, not all persistents, not all closers are built the same, right? Because, just because you hire a sales leader doesn't mean that they're going to come into your office and write 50 items tomorrow, right? because a lot of the times they need that supporting, that good onboarding, that training, and that, again, that supportive nature that's going to help them reach the heights that they need to get to. Okay. So reach out to us if you have any questions or you need more on the assessment, because this is our bread and butter. This is what we do. And Ideal Traits, in terms of a company, there's a lot of companies out there that can help you with sourcing, right? Getting in front of candidates. But not a lot of companies are effective as Ideal Traits when it comes to helping you with selection. Okay. There is a difference there, right? So as you go about this process, as I talked about at the very beginning, the best thing that you can do for your office today is begin your search for your next best salesperson. So if you don't already have a sales position posted, I encourage you to take some time today, the next 15 minutes, let's say, to put that job ad together, to get it posted, to start seeing applications coming in the door, so then you can start taking some of the things that you've learned here today and putting them into place to, again, search and bring in your next best salesperson. Okay. I shouldn't have said salesperson because that's specific to one of the personalities, but one of your next best salespeople. That may be a salesperson, I guess. A little play on words there. But nonetheless, I appreciate you all for attending. I appreciate you all for coming here to learn and to get more information on the assessment to be able to better use it. So again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm Nolan Duda. I'm the Client Experience Manager for Ideal Traits. Me and my team are always looking for ways to be able to support you all and help you all the best that we can. So if you have additional questions leaving this session, and maybe you joined us a little bit late and are wondering if we have a recording, that will be sent out either this afternoon or tomorrow, depending on when our team gets it uploaded to YouTube and gets it sent out to all of you. So again, I thank you so much for being here. If you did want that slide deck, reach out to me. I'm happy to provide it to you. But I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, a great rest of your week. If you haven't yet registered for Success Spotlight, we have that coming up in 2 weeks on Thursday with Farmers Agent Jonathan Quiones. So we're surely going to talk about a lot of great things there in terms of the assessment and hiring, and a lot of great best practices when it comes to that. So again, thank you all so much. We'll talk to you soon. And if you need anything else, feel free to chat, call, or email us, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thank you again.